and again, I'll talk abstractly in this case. Let's say we have table A that's related to table B that's related to table C. All right, so we have 3 tables in a chain. And you can extend this out as many tables as you want. All right? And table A, between table A and table B, you're cascading delete. And between table B and C, you're restricting deletions. All right? If I try to delete table B, it'll go out and try to delete everything associated with A that's in B. It will then try and go and delete everything from C that's associated in B, but it won't be able to because that foreign key is set to restrict. So, if I try to delete A, it'll try to delete everything in B that's associated with the row in A. It won't be able to delete if there are rows in C associated to any of those rows in B. All right? And therefore, if any of these restricts keep C from being deleted, then the whole delete fails. So it's not like, let's say there's 1 row in A, 5 rows in B associated with that, and for those 5 rows, one of them have something in C. All right? It would go and delete that, go and delete B. It could delete the first thing in B, second thing, third thing, fourth thing. The last thing, because there's a row in C related to the 5th row in B, because the foreign key is set to restrict, it won't delete it. That means none of these will get deleted. All right? It's important to consider with these inserts, updates, and deletes, especially the updates and deletes, is the statement either completely succeeds or completely fails. So it's not going to do half of the job. All right? It won't go and delete, for example, 4 of the 5 rows in B. All right? It'll delete none of them. All right. So a delete statement can succeed or it can fail. Now, why would a delete statement fail? Again, the main reason is for foreign key constraints. If you have a restrict foreign key constraint that will prohibit things from failing. All right? It could also fail due to syntax errors. All right? Hopefully our testing will catch those sorts of things. All right? It could also fail due to missing parameters. For example, if we're going to have a statement that looks like this, delete from student where SID equals, we better supply the value for that SID, right? And if we don't, we get an error. Those kinds of errors you should be able to shake out via your testing, right? Because that means that you didn't code something correctly. All right? Probably the tougher error, the one that there's nothing that you can do to prevent from happening, is a foreign key constraint. All right? Foreign key constraint, there's no way you can anticipate that, right? That, hey, in this time, this is going to fail. It's either going to fail or it's going to succeed. So, probably next time we'll talk about error trapping. Like, what do you do when something goes wrong? All right? What I want to do now is I want to implement deletions on a grid view. All right? We can implement updates and deletes on a grid view. All right? And let's talk about deletes first, and then we'll go in and we will talk about updates if we have time today. If not, we'll talk about them on Thursday. All right. So let's fire up the projector. I'm going to download the example that we had from last time, or a couple times ago. open up in Visual Studio, and let's revisit. There's one grid in particular that I want to address and incorporate deletions into. Actually, let's build one from scratch. So let's build a grid view that contains all the members of the faculty table. So let's go in and let's add a new page. Add a new web form. And we'll call it faculty MNT. MNT for maintenance, that is, we're going to be able to change and delete from this grid. Alright. I'm going to go and create the controls that we need on here, which will be a grid view and a SQL data source. So we'll go and we'll pick a grid view, drag it on up there, and we will create a SQL data source. All right, pick our database connection. I'm going to specify a custom statement. And notice, even though we haven't used it before, we have a delete and we have an update. All right, and we have an insert. Now, you're not able to insert into a grid view. We'll have to use a details view for that. All right, but we can update and delete right on the grid view. All right. So let's put a SQL statement in here, and I'm simply going to say select star from faculty. All right, and that'll be my SQL statement. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to put in my delete statement. And we know from before the delete statement is going to look something like this. Delete star from, delete from faculty where FID equals, now what faculty ID do we want to delete? I don't know, right? We'll have to determine that at runtime. So, what did we use in the other examples when we didn't know the specific value, but we were going to supply that at runtime? Question mark, exactly. So let me go and show this in Notepad to show what that SQL statement looks like before we proceed. So what we have, again, is I put in two statements. I put in both a select statement and a delete statement. Eventually, we'll have an insert and we'll have an update statement on the grid view, and on a details view, we'll have an insert. All right. So simple enough. Delete from faculty where FID equals question mark. All right. So let's go on to the next page. We can test our query. Yeah, that pulls up people. We can finish. Now let's go and configure our grid view. Choose our data source. And notice that when we do that, we have an option to, might be a little hard to see, but if you remember from before, we had an enable paging, we had an enable sorting, we also have enable deleting. All right? We don't have enable updating. Why not? Why do you think we don't have enable updating?
You need it on the other view.
Pardon me?
Use it on the other view.
No, you can update on this, you just can't insert.
Oh, okay.
This actually had me puzzled for a second. Why is there no enable updating? Well, we didn't put an updating statement in the data source, right? So it knows that you can't update because there's no update statement, so it doesn't even give us the option to try to update, which is nice of it, right? So I can, however, pick enable deleting. And what it does is it adds a column that says delete. All right? So let's go and run this and see what we get. All right. Let's go and try to delete someone. Oh, we get an error. All right. What error do we get? Well, it's the error that we were sort of half expecting. Right? It said the record cannot be deleted or changed because table student includes related records. Let's look. Who did we try to delete? We tried to delete Blanchard. Let's look at our database. Blanchard has a faculty ID of 2, and sure enough, if we look in the student table, we see that there is a couple students that have a faculty ID of 2. All right? So therefore, we're not able to delete that student. I'm sorry, not able to delete that faculty member. Let's look for one that doesn't have. All right? We have 2, 3, and 4. All right? Let's see one that we don't have. We don't have a student for Brown. Now, wait a minute. None of my students slipped out with the French students, did they? Let's have a count.
I was thinking about it.
Yeah, okay.
No, monsieur.
All right. So, we don't have any students for Brown, so we should be able to delete Brown. So let's go back to our application and delete Brown. There's another foreign key that I forgot. This student has, or this faculty member has a course section assigned to them. All right? Going to be a troublemaker, huh? Let's go in the course section table and let's go and change all the 5s to something else. All right. Now we can go and delete them. Now, there's at least a couple of things that you shouldn't like about what I've just shown you. All right? What are a couple things that you don't really like about what I showed you?
It was easy for you to change the other tables.
Oh no, that I went through the back door. That I went into Access to do that. That's not what I mean. Well, here's the two things I don't like. I guess when I say like or don't like, I guess that's subjective, right? Maybe you don't care that it did this. Number one, I was able to delete it without a confirmation, right? A destructive operation like that is probably not good to allow you to delete something without confirmation. So, I don't like that. The second thing I don't like is I don't like the fact that when it failed, it just blew up, right? It gave me a very ugly error message. And let me explain a little bit about error messages. If we go and delete this guy, error message, actually, we would not want the public to see this error message, right? Because this is broadcasting details about our database. It's saying we have a student table, all right? And as we look through here, we get some other potential insight to our data. So actually, the only reason I'm seeing this error message is because the web server knows that I'm in development mode. All right? In other words, my client is the same machine as the server. Right? I'm browsing the web on this machine. All right? And this machine is also the web server. So it knows I'm in development mode. So it's okay with me giving error messages. If this, for example, was on another web server, we would get a less clear error message than this. All right? And that's not good. All right? We want to supply, when you think of an error message, what do you want an error message to say? You want an error message to let the user know what happened. All right? In other words, was that row deleted or not? All right? This error message says that it wasn't deleted. The more generic error message that you're going to get won't say that that row wasn't deleted. So you want the user to know what happened, all right? And if something, quote, bad happened, what they could do to correct it, all right? Because maybe it's just a case that the database crashed, and maybe the solution is try again later. Or maybe the problem is, like in this case, there's related data to it. And in which case, that problem's never going to go away until we change the data and don't associate that faculty member with students or courses. All right? So, the generic error messages that we get from .NET aren't very good. They're not very clear. They don't help a user know what the user needs to do to correct the problem. All right? You have two choices in handling error messages. Handle them yourself or let the .NET framework handle them. Well, we've already seen that letting the .NET framework handling them isn't a good idea. Right? Isn't a good idea. Therefore, we want to handle them ourselves. All right? Now, how many of you have done error handling in VB before? Okay, what do you use to handle errors in VB?
Catch.
Yeah, try and catch. All right? And what do? You put your try and catch around the statements that you think might have an error, and if there is an error, your catch will catch it and do something with it. Well, I don't think that's going to work here, because if we look at the code behind, pardon my French, all right, to make a little pun, there ain't no code here, all right? So what do you put your try and catch around? Well, I don't know, all right? So, well, we really can't use the try-catch philosophy here. We have to do something else, all right? And what we can do is, if we look closely at these events, all right? If we look at the events associated with the grid view, I can't magnify these, so you'll have to take my word for it if you can't see them. You'll notice that there's several events, some of which are written in the present tense, some of them are written in the past tense. For example, there is row deleted and row deleting. All right? There is row updated, row updating. All right? A grid view doesn't allow insertion, but if we look at the details view, we will see the same thing, plus we'll see inserted and inserting. All right? Now, it's just as you suspect. These events get fired off in the framework. All right? What we can do is we can override and put our own code in these events to do stuff. We can do stuff either before the deletion happens or after. Now, there's a number of strategies that you can take for handling errors. All right? One is you can try to prevent the error from happening at all. All right? And you could do that by, we could write some very clever code in here that when we pulled up the grid view, it looked at to see if there was any related rows to that. And if there were any related rows to that faculty person, we could disable the deletion. All right? We could do that. We're not going to, at least not today, but we could do that. Or we could let the user try to do something wrong, but give them a warning before any damage is done. And that would be code that maybe we could put in the row deleting event. So they've clicked the delete. They've already done something that is potentially going to cause an error. But we don't let that error happen because we put code in the row deleting event so that it doesn't try the delete if certain conditions are true.
You could put a confirmation box up.
Well, yeah, eventually we can put a confirmation box up. But even with a confirmation box, I could say, yeah, I want to delete, and the delete still could fail, right, because of the cascading restrict issue. Lastly, we could have let things fall as they may and just be there with a broom and dustpan to clean up the mess that gets created. And the way I phrase that makes it sound like an unattractive option, but it's actually not. All right? We let the error happen, and we just report on it. And we report on it in a tidy way. And that's the first approach that we're going to take. In subsequent examples, we may try some of the other approaches, but for the first approach that we're going to take, we're going to let the error happen. We're going to let it try to delete it, and then if there's an error, we're going to tell about it. We're going to say, what's the likely cause of the error? All right. In a way, that's not bad, right? Why go through the all resources to check every single faculty person to tell if you can delete them or not, if the user might not even have any intent to delete any of them, right? So why go through all that effort, all right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the error happen, and I'm going to clean up after it. And therefore, I want the row deleted event. And if you notice, it created protected sub GridView1 row deleted, and it says that it handles the row deleted event of the grid view, and it gives us an argument to this function called E. And the type of that argument is a grid view deleted events argument. Well, that's a mouthful. What does that mean in lay people's terms? All right. This is information about what just happened. So by looking at this argument, we can tell if the deletion succeeded or failed. All right? Fair enough? Sure. So let's go in and let's put, first of all, let's put on our page a text box to hold our, a label to hold our error message. So I'll create this label, and I'll call it label error. I know I've I've seen some of you, and I think maybe even NORAD does this, instead of making a label, he'll make a text box and just disable entry. I don't like to do that. If it's a label, I want to make it a label. All right, I don't want to make it, I don't want to lie to it and say that, give it false hopes that maybe it will be a text box someday. No, it's a label. All right, if I want it to look a certain way, if I want to put a border around it, I can do that via CSS. All right, and I've said this before, don't lie to your web page. Don't make something an H2 just because you want the text bigger. All right, make it an H2 if it really is an H2, if it's a second level header. All right, so we have a label to display our error. Now let's go look at the code behind and proceed. All right, first thing we have to do is we have to find out whether there is an error or not, because there's not always going to be an error, right? Sometimes we're going to be able to delete the person. So how do we tell that? Well, one of the properties of this E argument is an exception object. All right? So, that exception object tells me whether there's been an error or not. All right? How does it tell me if there's an error? Well, if there's an error, there's an exception object. If there's no error, the exception object is null. All right? So, I'm going to write a very confusing line of code. And then we'll rewind and we'll look at it, because this violates all the rules of English, but we're not writing in English, we're writing in VB code. If not, E exception is nothing. All right? What? All right? I'm asking, is this not nothing? Now, if something is not nothing, it means it must be something. Unfortunately, there isn't a object in VB that says something. If I was writing it, I'd put it in there just so I wouldn't have to explain this every single semester. All right? But if not, E exception is nothing. That means, is there something in the exception object? Something in the exception object means that there's an error. So, this means that there's an error. And get your cameras out, because you're going to see something that I don't do all that often, unfortunately, a bad habit of mine. I'm actually going to comment a line of code. All right? So, let me put a comment in that says, this checks to, I'm not going to yell the comment, let me go back. This checks to see if there is an error. Not E exception is nothing means, is there something in the exception object which